In exercise 203, we're moving away from ratio and now talking about a rate. It's really important that you realise there's a difference between the two. With a ratio, we're comparing quantities, but they're in the same unit. In a rate, we're comparing quantities and they're not measured in the same units. They're two entirely different quantities. For example, speed is a good example of a rate. It compares, as you know, the distance with the time. So when we say 80 kilometres per hour, that's the speed. We're comparing the kilometres, or the distance travelled, with time. In that case, it's measured in hours. You may also be aware that speed could be measured in metres per second, and you're going to come across questions in this exercise where you take the rate in kilometres per hour and you convert it to a rate in metres per second. So one of the common things you'll do in this exercise is convert rates, converting rates. Just keep that in mind. The other common thing you'll do in this exercise is to simplify a rate. When you simplify a rate, the second quantity must be 1. So, obviously, when we talk about 80 kilometres per hour, the assumption there, the understanding there, is that it is 80 kilometres distance is travelled in 1 hour. We don't include the 1. It's an understanding that it'll be 1. That's the understanding of simplifying a rate. So, like I've got in the notes there, if you were given a speed of 500 kilometres per 5 hours, it's not in simplified form. So, if an instruction was to simplify that rate, then you would need to reduce the 5 hours to 1 hour. It's always that second quantity. Reduce it to 1, and of course you very easily see that conversion. To go from 5 hours down to 1, you need to divide, and by the way, the only operations we're allowed to perform are to multiply or divide the parts of the rate, and that is similar to ratio. The only way we were allowed to adjust the ratio was to multiply or divide every part. So that aspect of ratio also applies in rates, and so our 500 kilometres an hour per 5 hours becomes 100. So in organising your thoughts about what you're learning here, you will be either asked to convert rates or simplify rates. So these are the two areas that we're focusing on learning how to master: converting rates, simplifying rates. Let's have a look at the question. A hose delivers 3,840 litres of water in 1 hour. Oh, I quite like that. We can see it's a rate comparing litres and time. I like it because it's got 1 hour. It then says, what is the flow rate in litres per minute? So this is an example of converting rates. You can see I've underlined the important features. I've actually circled this because it's in contrast to the way the rate was written here in terms of an hour, and now it's per minute. You can see that I've already started to set up my solution. So start with the information that's given, and that's something that we do with every problem style question. We identify what's given in the question. So it's given that we've got 3,840 litres per minute. You can see I've left an obvious space, and I'm working through, and hopefully this is like my last line, will be so many litres per minute. So I can see there that I'm going to convert basically my hours to minutes. I don't have to do any conversion on the litres, which is really nice. So my first step would be to think about, I've got 1 hour and I need to convert it to minutes. I think we can see immediately that we could write without multiplying or dividing. Just simply replace 1 hour with 60 minutes. Now, all I've done is replaced the unit. I haven't changed the size of it. I've just replaced the unit with a conversion that I know. 1 hour, 60 minutes. In my next step, I'm going to have to change the size of the unit. I'm going from 60 minutes down to 1. We know that the only operations you're allowed is to multiply or divide, and obviously in this case I'm going to divide, because 60 divided by 60 gives me the 1 that's understood to be in this position here. However, remember me saying rates behave like ratios in this situation, where if you divide one quantity, you must divide the other quantity. So over here you'll see I'll have divide by 60. And you can see there on the calculator that the answer is 64. I would encourage you to set your working out like this. Practice this setting out in each of your answers, and then we've got a nice pattern to get established, and when we get into an exam or looking at a question we've never seen before, we still are going to follow this pattern. If we've recognised in the question that we're converting the rate, we'll follow this pattern. There will of course be more difficult questions where you may be required to convert both units. So obviously that solution would take a lot more steps, but in that case you convert one quantity at a time. So we would go through and we would, and you usually work on the first quantity. Convert your first quantity if that's needed, but in this case it wasn't. Then work on getting your second one down to 1. This next example is also an example of converting rates, but we will see that we need to do some simplifying as well. So we'll get to see both processes. The cost of 35 litres of petrol is $44.45. Express this cost as a rate in cents per litre. That's really important. It's specified the order of the rate. So cents per litre means we're talking initially dollars per litre. So you don't always write your rate in the order in which the numbers are given. You are looking for this sort of instruction to write the rate. So keep that in mind. It would be possible in different situation, different question, different wording, to write this rate as litres per dollars, the number of litres per $1. But that wasn't the case for the wording of this question. That's why it's really important to read the question several times, pay attention to every little part of the words of the question, and make sure you really are answering the question as it is written. So this first step, setting up your rate, is really important. Because we're heading towards cents per litre, I know that I want the money amount first and the quantity as the second part of the rate. Now we can see that really the only conversion we need to do is of units is convert our dollars to cents. That's pretty easy. That's multiplied by 100. So we've got 4,445 cents per 35 litres. I didn't do any adjusting the size of a unit. I just converted the unit. So these two things are exactly the same. These two things should be exactly the same. However, At this stage now, you see me simplify the rate. I have the rate in cents per litre, but my understanding is I would always give my rate simplified. So what has to happen is I've got to take 35 litres and reduce it down to 1. Just like we had 60 minutes here, reducing it down to 1. So the process is the same. We need to divide by 35. If I divide this side by 35, it'll be perfect. It will give me the 1 litre that is understood to be there. However, on this side, I need to also divide by 35, keeping my cents, but I'm definitely changing the size of things. And you can see there, this time on the calculator, I've actually used this fraction button, and the answer you can see is 127. So you can see there in this example, the two areas that we are commonly asked to address or answer a question about, which is converting rates, which is converting the units, or simplifying rates, which means we're getting our second unit reduced to 1. Now please fill out what you've learned, what I've emphasised, what you expect to be able to answer questions about in your summary and key points section, and then get started on exercise 203.